I still remember that summer afternoon when the sun was like gold on the dusty road of a small town in the west. The air was hot and stuffy, making both my father and I want to stay away from the harsh sun. I was Lily Clark, just 5 years old. Everything in my eyes was huge and mysterious. This small town was my whole world, and the family's Clark's general store was the microcosm where I spent most of my time playing. I was playing with a faded rag doll that day when something caught my eye. There was a small, lonely figure huddled behind some old crates at the back of the store. At first, I thought it was a stray cat looking for food, but when I looked closer, I realized it was a little girl. A skinny girl with messy black hair, like the dark clouds in the sky before a storm. My young heart sank as I took a closer look at the strange girl. Her clothes were torn and hastily patched together as if they were made from hundreds of different scraps of fabric. Her bare little feet were covered in dirt and sand, as if she had walked a long way. Her tiny body was hunched over, curled up as if she wanted to disappear into the old crates that lay motionless. "Dad, there's someone out there." I pulled on his hand, my voice filled with curiosity and concern. Samuel Clark, my father, a tall man with a stern face, turned his gaze to the back of the store. His face immediately darkened. The wrinkles on his forehead deepened a few degrees, and his voice immediately became serious. "Don't come near there, Lily. She's just a local girl wandering around. Nothing to worry about. Go inside." I could hear the annoyance in my father's voice, an annoyance I had never heard before. But my curiosity and sympathy were stronger than his warning. I gently let go of my father's hand and sneaked a glance at the little girl again. Only then did I realize that the little girl was also looking at me, her deep, jet-black eyes sparkling like a quiet lake in the middle of distant mountains. Met mine. At that moment, I saw pain, loneliness, and a very intense desire for something in her gaze. She looked down at her belly, her tiny hand gently placed on her belly, her face full of pain. I immediately understood that she was hungry, the hunger that made her small body tremble nonstop. I had never been hungry for a day in my life, but in that moment, a strange feeling welled up inside me, a feeling of pain and sadness that I could not explain with my young words. All I knew was that at that moment, I wanted to do something for that girl, the friend whose name I did not even know, Lily. "I told you, come inside now," my father shouted, his voice becoming more stern. "But Dad, she's hungry," I replied softly, my eyes never leaving the little girl. "Don't be stubborn. Their people are not our concern," my father replied sharply, his voice full of prejudice that I could not understand at the time. I had never seen my father so upset. He was always affectionate and gentle with me, but now his eyes were tense and wary. He looked at me as if I had said something strange and unacceptable. But I, an innocent child, understood nothing of such prejudices. There was only compassion in me, pure and natural as breathing. As my father turned and went into the store to check the books, I quietly took the bread and some bacon my mother had prepared for lunch. Holding it tightly in my hand, I tiptoed towards the little girl, my heart pounding in my chest. When I was only a few steps away from her, the little girl was startled, her eyes wide open, full of fear, like a little rabbit about to run away. But when she saw that I had no ill intentions, carrying nothing but a small smile and a portion of food in my hand, her eyes softened, from fear to hesitation, and finally a faint hope. "Hi, I'm Lily. Here's my sandwich. Would you like some?" I brought the food closer, my voice as soft and friendly as possible. The little girl looked at me, then down at the bread, her face filled with surprise and emotion. Her hands trembled as she took the bread, her eyes filled with silent gratitude. At that moment, the two of us, two small children in this big town, connected through a wordless language that only the heart could understand. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice gentle. "Ayana." The girl replied in a very small voice, as weak as a whisper on the wind. "Ayana," I repeated, the name feeling beautiful and strange. We just looked at each other. In the sweltering heat of the afternoon, in the midst of prejudices that I was unaware of, there was only sympathy and innocent friendship of two little hearts. I had no idea that my small action that day would forever change my life, Ayana's life, and this peaceful town as well. Because sometimes destiny will start from the simplest thing, from a small piece of bread, from an innocent heart that knows how to share. I had no idea that that meeting was the starting point of a long journey that every time I remember it, my heart will be moved, full of sympathy, but also full of hope. The room was so quiet that I could hear Ayana's trembling breaths. Her eyes were wide open in panic, as if she had just heard something extremely strange. I kept my small hand holding the fragrant piece of bread, holding it towards her with a hopeful look. I asked very softly but clearly, echoing throughout the backyard of the store, "Are you hungry?" My words fell like a small stone into a still lake, creating ripples that spread out. I could feel the tension in my parents behind me. Samuel, who prided himself on his composure, stood frozen, staring at me with a stunned gaze. Sarah's mother raised her hand to her mouth, her familiar, gentle gaze suddenly filled with confusion and bewilderment. Dad took a step forward, intending to stop her, but then he stopped. I don't know what kept him there, but I could see the surprise mixed with a little curiosity in his stern eyes. Maybe he couldn't believe that his little girl could do something he never thought possible. Ayana remained still, her eyes panicked, her dry lips moving, but no sound came out. She looked at the bread, then back at me as if she didn't understand why a stranger, especially a white man like me, would give her food. Her body was as tense as a bowstring. Her small hands clenched into fists, trembling with fear. I noticed that Ayana did not dare to take the piece of bread, so I became more patient. I moved a little closer and softly encouraged her. "Don't be afraid. This is my mother's bread. It's delicious. And there's cheese too." I reached out my other hand and opened a piece of golden cheese. Ayana looked at me, her eyes shining with a strange emotion, as if she wanted to believe, but also as if she didn't dare to believe. Her hand timidly reached out and then retracted, her eyes filled with doubt. She was probably so used to being rejected, to being shunned, that she couldn't believe that there was still unconditional kindness in the world. "Lily, don't do this," my father finally said, his voice hoarse and slightly panicked. But I ignored her, my eyes still fixed on Ayana. I wanted to prove to this little girl that not everyone was like those who had treated her badly. I whispered softly, loud enough for only Ayana to hear. "Eat, just eat, you'll get better." The seconds passed like hours. Finally, Ayana carefully reached out to take the piece of bread, holding it in her hand as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. Ayana's eyes were still cautious, but now there was a sparkle of fragile trust. She brought the bread to her lips, took a small, light bite as if afraid she was dreaming. I felt my father and mother's gaze from behind me. They didn't say anything, just stood there, silently watching. I didn't know what was going on in their hearts, but I felt a change, a very small change, but a very important one. Ayana chewed slowly, her eyes half closed, tears suddenly falling from the corners of her small eye. She cried silently. Not a single sob, only tears silently flowing down her cheeks. Ayana looked up at me. In those deep eyes, for the first time I felt a genuine connection between two young souls. Suddenly, a weak sound came from Ayana, so small that I thought I had misheard, but she repeated it again, more clearly. "Ayana, my name is Ayana." It was the first time I heard her voice, clear, weak, but extremely beautiful. Ayana's words were like a small miracle, breaking the tense silence that was everywhere. I turned to look at my parents, and surprisingly, my father's face softened. His eyes were looking at Ayana with sympathy and regret. Sarah's mother wiped away the tears that were about to fall, gently smiled and nodded at me. As a silent and touching approval, we sat there, two little children side by side, sharing a simple but meaningful piece of bread and cheese. Ayana ate slowly, reverently, as if savoring a special, sacred dish. Her tears fell silently, blending with the shy smile that slowly spread across her dry, cracked lips. None of us knew that. From a far corner of the tree, a local elder had been watching us for a long time. His old and sharp eyes had seen everything, from Ayana's surprise, to my act of kindness, to my parents' emotional gaze. The elder's eyes were skeptical at first, then gradually softened, warmed, and finally shone with hope for something new, something better. At that moment, something in the air changed, subtly but profoundly. Little did I know that my small act had planted a seed for a great change, a seed of love, compassion, and understanding between people of different skin colors and cultures. Beside Ayana, I felt like I had done something very right. A strange, pure joy welled up in my heart, making me smile slightly in the softening afternoon sunlight. And in that moment, I understood that sometimes just a small action, but done with all my heart, is enough to change the whole world. And perhaps, from today, my little world and Ayana's will never be the same again. The next morning came as strange as ever. I woke up just as dawn was breaking, but I immediately noticed something was different. The usually bustling little town was now enveloped in a thick, tense silence, as if the town itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. My small bare feet lightly stepped down the wooden stairs. I opened the back door quietly, expecting to see Ayana in the backyard like yesterday. But she was no longer there. Her seat was now empty, only a faint mark on the sandy ground. "Dad, where is Ayana?" I turned to ask my father, my voice filled with worry. Samuel looked up from his pile of papers, his face still troubled, his eyes filled with something unnamed. "I don't know. Lily, maybe she's gone back to her people," he replied, but his voice was uncertain. At that moment, a strange sound suddenly rang out on the main road. The sound of galloping horses, the excited whispers of the villagers. Father immediately dropped the papers on the table, quickly went to the window to look outside. Mother and I also ran to him, our eyes wide open at the scene we had never seen before. A large group of people slowly entered the town, majestic horsemen in splendid native costume, their colorful feathers adding color to the gloomy morning. Leading the group was an elderly chief with a stern, majestic face, his eyes shining with power but also with kindness. It was Chief Running Bear, the most powerful chief in the area, a man my father often spoke of with both respect and wariness. My heart was pounding in my chest as the caravan stopped right in front of our general store. The elders slowly dismounted, carefully cradling the precious gifts they carried in their hand: ancient shield, beautiful turquoise necklaces, hand-painted animal skins. All glistened in the morning sun. Chief Running Bear stepped forward, his deep voice echoing throughout the small town. "We come here today to honor the kindness and pure heart of your daughter, Lily Clark." My father was startled and stunned, and I could only stand still, my heart pounding with excitement. I looked up at the chief's powerful yet gentle face and ventured to ask quietly, "Where is Ayana?" Sir." The chief's eyes softened, a slight smile crossing his stern face. "Ayana is my granddaughter." His voice was soft and loving. "She lost her voice when her parents died and has been mute ever since. But yesterday, you helped Ayana regain the most precious thing in life, her voice." I was stunned, my eyes wide open, unable to believe what I had just heard. Ayana, the frail little girl from yesterday, was the granddaughter of this powerful chief, and with just a small and innocent action of mine, had helped her regain her long-lost voice. "Ayana is learning to use her voice again, Lily, and she just keeps talking about you." The chief continued, his voice shaking with emotion. An elder slowly stepped forward, solemnly raising an ancient, intricately carved war shield that sparkled in the sunlight. Chief Running Bear took it and turned towards me, his voice resounding with power. "This shield is a symbol of friendship, peace, and courage. We would like to present it to Lily, in honor of her unprejudiced heart and rare kindness." Samuel suddenly stepped forward awkwardly, his face red with embarrassment. "Sir, this gift is too precious. I cannot accept it." Chief Running Bear gently but firmly interrupted. "Value is not in material things, Samuel Clark. It is in genuine kindness, without prejudice like other people." At that moment, a harsh, angry voice rang out from the crowd of villagers who had gathered to watch the event. It was Tom Bradley, a man who was well known for his influence in the town. Bradley stepped forward, his eyes filled with hostility and hatred, and his voice was full of menace. "If you accept that gift, Samuel, be prepared that this store will lose all its loyal customers. You will pay dearly for this foolish act." The atmosphere immediately became tense. All eyes turned to my father. Sarah gently placed her hand on her husband's shoulder, her eyes strong and reassuring. "Samuel, don't listen to his meaningless threats. Compassion and kindness are what we want to teach Lily." Samuel hesitated, his face full of tension and anxiety. But at that moment, Mrs. Henderson, the venerable old teacher, stepped out of the crowd, her voice clear and strong. "I fully support Lily and the Clark family. It's a shame that someone would hold such blind prejudice as Bradley." Voices of agreement began to rise from many directions in the crowd. A gentle but steady wave of support spread, causing Bradley to pale and retreat in anger. Finally, Samuel took a step forward, his eyes filled with determination. He reached out, placing his steady hand on the shield that Chief Running Bear held, his voice stronger and clearer than ever. Samuel Clark, accept this gift with great honor, for I am proud of my daughter and of her kindness. The whole town erupted in cheers and applause, and I stood there, my little heart filled with joy and new hope. That morning, my little world really changed. I understood that just one small action, but if it comes from kindness, will always be enough to break all prejudice, change the world around. I stood there, my small hand clasping my father's strong one. The tension from Mr. Bradley's harsh words still simmered. But to my surprise, as Bradley turned and walked away angrily, he found himself completely alone. No one in town followed him. No one agreed with his venomous threats. It was the first time I had seen the most powerful man in town humiliated and retreating in heavy silence. The sight was a clear signal of a great change in the townspeople. A few of the townspeople began to approach, hesitantly at first, but quickly gaining courage. They looked at me, my father, and then at Chief Running Bear with eyes that were no longer suspicious or wary, but instead filled with respect and sincere gratitude. Chief Running Bear stepped forward, his stern demeanor now soft and gentle. He gently placed his aged hand on my father's shoulder, his voice warm and deep. Samuel Clark, you did the right thing today, something very few people dare to do. Thank you. Because you and your little girl gave Ayanna hope, something we thought was lost forever a long time ago. My father said nothing, just bowed his head slightly, but I could clearly feel his hand trembling slightly. Perhaps at this moment, he truly understood the power of my small action yesterday. At that moment, a small figure approached the group from behind. It was Ayanna. Today she was wearing the colorful traditional costume of the tribe. Her long, shiny hair was neatly tied with colorful strings. What surprised me the most was when she stepped forward, looked straight into my eyes, and spoke. A clear, sweet voice rang out clearly, as if it had never been lost before. Hi Lily, nice to see you again. Ayanna's words rang out like magic, making everyone around surprised. Touched and happy, I immediately ran to Ayanna's side, our two little hands tightly holding each other. We looked at each other and smiled. In that moment, I understood that Ayanna and I were no longer two strangers, but had become true friends, true sisters. You know, Lily, Ayanna said softly, her eyes shining with amused surprise. My name, Ayanna, means everlasting flower in our tribe's language, and your name, Lily, also means a flower. A pure and beautiful flower. I was stunned for a moment, then burst out laughing. It was strange how two strangers with two completely different cultures could have such a magical connection right from their names. I suddenly felt more attached to Ayanna, as if our friendship had been destined long ago. At this moment, Chief Running Bear gently placed the ancient war shield on the ground before us. He spoke softly but with power. This shield will now symbolize peace and friendship between our two peoples. And you two are the ones who carry the mission of protecting that sacred thing. Ayanna and I both bent down to look at the shield. It glistened in the sunlight, the intricate patterns telling a long and beautiful story of kindness and connection between hearts. Samuel stood a foot away from us, his eyes shining with an indescribable pride. I saw my father squeeze Sarah's hand, and she smiled with emotion and pride. I knew that my parents had finally understood the most important thing. That kindness knows no race or background. The indigenous elders stepped forward and handed the townspeople small but meaningful gifts, stone necklaces and handmade everyday items. The gifts were a way for the tribe to express their deep gratitude to those who had courageously stood up to support friendship and peace between the two communities. My eyes suddenly turned to Bradley. From a distance, he was still standing there, his face full of resentment and anger, but he could do nothing more. He had lost his power when his hatred and prejudice no longer had a place in the heart of the small town. Amidst the joy and laughter, I looked up at my father, who was intently observing every little detail of the day, as if he wanted to memorize it all deep in his heart. He had learned something very important, something I had also taught him. An open heart and a small act of kindness can change everything. As the sun rose and the ceremony drew to a close, Chief Running Bear stepped closer to my father, his old hand on his shoulder, his voice echoing with sincerity. Samuel, today is the first day of understanding and peace between us. Thank you for teaching your daughter kindness, and let this peace always be in our heart. Samuel looked deep into the chief's eyes, nodded gently, his eyes filled with tears but full of pride. No, it was my daughter who taught me this important lesson. Thank you, son, for opening your heart to us. In that moment, I knew that my little town would be forever changed. Today's story, Ayana and I's story, had planted a new seed, a seed of peace, kindness, and compassion. And I knew for sure that when that seed grew, this town would become a place filled with light and love. Many years later, the ancient shield still hung proudly on the wall of the Clark's General Store. The morning light filtered through the windows, illuminating the antique patterns, creating golden rays, sparkling and alive as the day it was first presented. Every time I passed the store, I stopped and looked up, my eyes fixed on the shield, and my heart was filled with pride and gratitude. The shield was more than just a gift. It became a living symbol of this small town's most beautiful story. A story that Lily and I, my little girl, were lucky enough to be a part of. And every time a new customer entered the store, looking curiously at that unfamiliar shield, I would smile kindly and begin to tell the story of that day, the story of Lily, of Ayana, of pure kindness and courage coming from an innocent heart. Sometimes, when I tell the story, I still see skeptical look, even disapproval. I have to admit that after that day's decision, my shop did lose some long-time customers. People who still harbor deep prejudice and hatred like Bradley. At first, I also felt anxious and spent nights tossing and turning over questions about my family's future and livelihood. But then, time taught me that there are things in life that are much more valuable than money, that is, sincere, fearless love. Instead of losing anything, my family gained something invaluable. We received respectful and friendly looks from townspeople who were hesitant to approach us, warm smiles from elders, and most of all, absolute sincerity from our tribe friends, something we never thought we would experience one day. Strangers gradually became friends, close neighbors, and our small town became more alive and warm than ever. As Lily grew older, I would sit with her and gently recount the events of that day as a life lesson. I always wanted her to remember that her unconditional kindness changed not just one life, but a large community. Lily always listened to the story with eyes shining, filled with gratitude and hope. The most amazing thing is that the story of Lily and Ayana did not stop in this town. It spread far beyond the borders of our small land, becoming an inspiring oral story, a living testament to the miraculous power of kindness and courage. Later, people traced back to realize that from that small event of that day, a lasting and profound peace was gradually established between the indigenous and settler communities throughout the territory. When I think about it, I always feel a deep pride in my heart, proud of Lily, my little but brave daughter, who taught me a priceless lesson. Kindness needs no translation, and true courage often comes from the smallest things. Thanks to that event, I understand that sometimes we adults are so busy worrying and calculating big, complicated things that we forget that truly important changes, truly historical moments, sometimes come from a simple, pure action of a 5-year-old child. And what makes me happiest is when I see Ayana and Lily growing up together, sharing all the joys and sorrows of life. Ayana has become a smart, talented girl, becoming the leader of many meetings and understandings between the two nations. Lily, my daughter, also grew up with a heart full of compassion, always helping everyone without ever caring about differences in origin or skin color. Every afternoon, as the gentle sunset falls over the town, I often stand by the door and look out, admiring the peaceful, friendly life we have built together. And each time, I silently thank Lily, thank the little girl who has the courage to teach me and this whole town a most important lesson about kindness. Our story has become a living legacy, inspiring many generations to come. It is not only a story of reconciliation between two different cultures, but also a testament to the amazing power of pure kindness. Today, as I stand beneath the ancient shield and retell Lily's story to a small group of attentive students, I know that legacy will live forever in the hearts of the people of this town. You know, I said softly, sometimes all it takes is a brave heart, a small hand extended at the right time to change the world. Kindness needs no language or translation, and courage sometimes comes from the simplest things. The children's eyes lit up, filled with emotion and hope. And I realized that the most beautiful legacy Lily left to this town was her belief in the power of kindness. A gentle breeze blew by, causing the feathers hanging from the shield to quiver, as if in agreement with my story. And I know that kindness and courage will live on in the hearts of all who have heard this story, the story of a 5-year-old girl with a great heart who changed the world with just a small piece of bread and a pure heart.